When did you catch feelings for someone truly evil? I was at the library when a pretty brunette approached me with tears streaming down her face. My school reunion is about to happen in 10 minutes. I'll pay you $200 to be my date. I smiled, thinking I hit the jackpot. What's the catch? You have to pretend we've been together for years. I closed my laptop. What's your name? Liliana. We made eye contact and smiled at the same time, and for a moment I forgot this was transactional. I should have known pretty girls don't pay for dates unless something's very wrong. During the drive, Liliana kept coaching me. We met at a bookstore. You love my laugh. At a red light, she grabbed my hand. Whatever happens, whatever they say, just promise you won't leave me alone with them. The way she said them made my stomach twist. But I promised anyway, nervous about what I'd just gotten myself into. And the second we walked into that hotel ballroom, I knew I'd made a mistake. Conversations literally stopped mid-sentence. Someone whispered, "That's her, the one who killed Elias." Liliana's nails dug into my arm, and I whispered into her vanilla-scented hair, trying to calm us both. Don't worry, I never break a promise. As I looked around, I realized people weren't just avoiding us. They were creating a physical barrier, backing away like we were contagious. At the bar, an older man with trembling hands stared at us with the kind of hatred I'd only seen in movies. My gaze followed his finger that pointed to a memorial table. On it was a photo frame labeled Elias in a graduation cap, surrounded by candles and a banner that read, "Forever 18. My mouth went dry. This wasn't high school drama. Someone was dead. Liliana saw it and froze. What happened? I whispered, but part of me didn't want to know. She pulled me toward the bathroom. I'll explain everything later. Just please, 1 hour. That's all I need. On the way to the bathroom, we were stopped by a linebacker-sized guy who blocked our path. I pushed Liliana behind me while my heart hammered. I'm Elias's brother. You need to see this. He shoved his phone in my face and unpaused a video. It looked like it was filmed on a toaster, but as I squinted, I could make out the face of Liliana as a 17-year-old. She was clearly drunk and surrounded by laughing friends. I destroyed Elias's life, and honestly, it was easy. One little lie about him forcing himself on me, and boom, everyone believed it. She kept going. He begged me to tell the truth. Actually got on his knees crying, but he hurt me, so she shrugged her shoulders, and everyone in the video laughed. My blood went cold. When I looked at her, her face was drained of color. I can explain. She tried to back up, but there was nowhere to go. 4 more guys surrounded us. She drove our friend to Sewerslide with a fake assault claim. One grabbed a beer bottle. It's time someone taught her about consequences. Even knowing what she'd done, I couldn't watch 5 drunk guys attack a woman. My body moved before my brain could stop it. I stepped between them. The tension exploded when Elias's mom appeared and slapped her hard across the face. You killed my son! Security showed up, but just shrugged their shoulders and chuckled. I grabbed her wrist. We're leaving. Now. In the parking lot, she broke down completely against my car, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. I was 17 and stupid and vindictive. I never thought he'd actually... Liliana, what the F did you do? She just stared at me, not wanting to face the weight of the truth. Her words spilled out between sobs. He rejected me in front of everyone at Brad's party. Said I wasn't his type, that I was too intense. Everyone laughed. I was humiliated. So I told people he followed me to the bathroom and tried to force himself on me. Just a little rumor to hurt him back. My stomach churned as she continued, her words coming faster like she needed to get them out. But then someone called the police, and the school got involved. The story got bigger, and I couldn't take it back without admitting I lied. He lost his scholarship, got expelled. She looked up at me, mascara streaking her face. Even destroyed like this, she was beautiful. I hated myself for thinking it. 3 months later, he hung himself in his bedroom, left a note saying he couldn't live as a registered intimacy offender for something he didn't do. The space between us changed. She leaned in, still crying. But when you stood between me and them, for a second I thought maybe I'm not beyond redemption. My heart was pounding despite my disgust. Wrong, 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 my brain screamed. Could someone like you ever forgive someone like me? She whispered, her lips almost brushing mine. I was frozen, my hand moving toward her face without thinking, not knowing if I was going to push her away or pull her in. My hand jerked back like I'd touched something hot, and I stumbled away from her, the spell breaking as my brain finally won the fight against whatever messed up thing my body was feeling. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and nodded like she'd expected this, her shoulders dropping as she leaned back against my car door. I'll drive you somewhere safe, I said, my voice coming out rougher than I meant it to. That's all I can do right now. She didn't argue or try to convince me otherwise, just walked around to the passenger side while I unlocked the doors with shaking hands. We sat in my car for a minute while I tried to get my breathing back to normal, the parking lot lights making everything look yellow and sick. Where do you want to go? I finally asked, starting the engine. She mentioned her friend Sarah's place on the other side of town, then stopped mid-sentence and shook her head. Never mind. Haven't talked to her since it all happened. Her voice got smaller with each word. I pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward the highway, remembering a cheap motel I'd passed on the way to the reunion. Neither of us said anything during the 15-minute drive, just sat there with the radio playing some old rock song that felt wrong for what was happening. The motel was one of those places that probably rented rooms by the hour, with a flickering neon sign missing half its letters. I parked and went into the office while she stayed in the car, paid for one night with the $200 bills she'd given me earlier. The desk clerk didn't even look up from his phone as he slid the key across the counter. Walking back to the car, I handed her the money and the room key, and we both stared at those bills for a second, understanding the weird circle we'd come full. She took them without saying anything and got out of the car, then turned back before closing the door. Will you at least let me explain everything tomorrow? Really explain? Her voice was barely above a whisper. I nodded before I could stop myself. Breakfast at the diner on 5th Street. 9 o'clock, just to get closure on this whole insane night. She walked toward room 12 and I drove home, my apartment feeling too quiet and normal after everything that had happened. I tried to sleep, but kept seeing that grainy video playing on repeat in my head. Teenage Liliana laughing about how easy it was to destroy someone's life. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elias in that graduation photo, 18 years old with his whole future ahead of him, not knowing it was already gone. I saw his mom's shaking hands, his brother's face twisted with rage, all those people backing away from us like we were poison. I gave up trying to sleep around 4 in the morning and just sat on my couch watching infomercials until the sun came up. At 8:30, I drove to the diner, ordering coffee and sitting in a booth where I could see the door. She walked in right at 9 wearing the same black dress from the reunion, wrinkled now and making her look smaller somehow, like she'd shrunk overnight. She slid into the booth across from me and ordered black coffee from the waitress, then wrapped her hands around the mug when it came like she was trying to warm up, even though it was already getting hot outside. Brad's party was supposed to be the best night of senior year, she started, staring down at her coffee. Everyone was there, even Elias, who usually stayed home studying. She told me how she'd had a crush on him for months, how she'd finally worked up the courage to tell him, how he'd laughed and said she was too intense, too much, in front of everyone by the pool. Her friends had found her crying in the bathroom later, telling her she couldn't let him get away with humiliating her like that she needed to teach him a lesson. It started as just a rumor, she said, her voice flat like she'd told herself this story 100 times. I told my friend Jessica that he'd followed me to the bathroom and tried something, just wanted him to feel embarrassed for once. But Jessica told 3 other people, and they told more people, and by Monday morning half the school was talking about how Elias had attacked Liliana at Brad's party. Someone's parent called the police, the school started an investigation, and suddenly it wasn't just gossip anymore. Once the police got involved, I couldn't take it back without admitting I'd lied to them too, she said. I kept my hands wrapped tight around my coffee mug to stop myself from reaching across the table, even though part of me wanted to comfort her, and I hated myself for that impulse. Did you ever try to tell the truth before he... I couldn't finish the sentence. She looked up at me for the first time since she'd started talking, her eyes red and puffy. I thought about it every day, but I was scared of going to jail, scared of what everyone would think of me, scared of losing everything. Her voice broke on the last word, so I let him lose everything instead. My phone started buzzing on the table between us, notification after notification lighting up the screen. Someone from the reunion had posted about the confrontation, and the video of teenage Liliana was already spreading across social media with comments calling for justice for Elias, calling her a monster, calling for her to pay for what she'd done. Liliana saw my phone screen and started shaking so hard she knocked over her water glass. The comments kept coming in faster than I could read them. Someone had tagged the local news station. Another person posted her home address. She grabbed my wrist. I can't go through this again. I pulled my hand away and reminded her that Elias couldn't go through it either, and he didn't get a choice. The waitress came over to clean up the spilled water and gave us both a look that said she knew exactly who we were. Liliana asked what I thought she should do now. I told her that wasn't my decision to make, but if she wanted any chance at redemption, she needed to start with the truth. Not some watered-down version or excuse-filled confession, but the actual truth about what she did and why. She nodded and stared down at the puddle of water spreading across the table. I set a clear boundary right there in that diner booth. I'd help her stay safe for 1 week while she figured out her next steps, but I wouldn't be her boyfriend or her savior or whatever she was hoping for when she leaned in for that kiss last night. She understood that was more than she deserved. We left the diner separately, and I spent that afternoon at my apartment researching Elias online. The news articles were worse than I imagined. He'd been accepted to 3 colleges with full scholarships for engineering. His parents spent their retirement savings on lawyers trying to clear his name. The school expelled him 2 weeks before graduation. There were photos of him at science fairs and robotics competitions, always with this huge smile. One article mentioned he'd been building a robot to help kids with disabilities learn to walk. I found Cody on social media and sent him a message saying I wanted to understand what really happened. He agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown, but warned me not to bring that monster with me. His profile picture was him and Elias at what looked like a baseball game, both wearing matching jerseys. Around 6 that evening, Liliana texted me from a different motel saying people had found her first location. Someone had spray painted something on her door, and the manager kicked her out. She was scared, but said she understood why people were angry. She sent me the address of the new place and asked if I could bring her some food, since she was afraid to leave the room. I dropped off Chinese takeout but didn't go inside, just left it at the door and texted her it was there. 2 days later, I met Cody at the coffee shop. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in years. He showed me photos on his phone of Elias before everything happened. There was one at his 18th birthday party surrounded by friends, another at prom looking awkward in a rented tux. Then he showed me the ones from after the accusation. Elias got thinner in each photo. The smile disappeared completely. In the last one, taken a week before he died, he looked like a ghost. Cody told me about the final months, the depression that swallowed his brother whole, the failed appeals that cost them everything, how their dad had a heart attack from the stress, and their mom aged 10 years in 3 months. Elias stopped eating and wouldn't leave his room. They tried to get him help, but he kept saying there was no point when everyone thought he was a predator. The day before he died, he'd actually seemed better. He cleaned his room and told his mom he loved her. They thought maybe he was turning a corner. I asked Cody what he wanted from Liliana now. He stared at his coffee for a long time before answering. He said he just wanted her to admit publicly what she did, not for revenge, but so his brother's name could finally be cleared, so their family could stop being the people whose son was a predator and become the people whose son was a victim. He wanted the truth on record, somewhere official, not just whispered at reunions. When I went to Liliana's motel room later and told her what Cody wanted, she broke down completely. She sat on the cheap bedspread and cried for 20 minutes straight, but when she finally stopped, she agreed it was the least she could do. She got out a legal pad and started drafting a statement admitting to the false accusation. Her handwriting was shaky, and she had to start over 3 times because her tears kept smudging the ink. She asked me to help her word it right. I told her to just write exactly what happened without trying to justify anything. That night, my phone started blowing up with messages from people I didn't even know were connected to this. 3 of Liliana's old friends from the video reached out warning me to stay away from the situation. One of them called me directly. She was in that video laughing when Liliana bragged about destroying Elias. She admitted they all knew Liliana was lying about the assault, but thought it would just blow over. She said they were just dumb kids who didn't think anyone would actually get hurt. She kept saying she was sorry, like I was the one who needed to hear it. The next morning, Liliana called me from a payphone saying she'd found a lawyer through legal aid who would see her that afternoon. I picked her up from the motel and drove her to this tiny office above a dry cleaner where the lawyer worked out of what looked like a converted storage room. He was this older guy with coffee stains on his tie who didn't even look up from his papers when we walked in. When Liliana explained what she wanted to do, he finally put down his pen and stared at her like she'd lost her mind. He laid out exactly what would happen if she went public with a confession. The state could charge her with perjury, which carried up to 5 years in prison. The Graham family could sue her for every penny she'd ever make. She'd probably never get a decent job again with this on her record. Her hands were shaking as she took notes on everything he said. She asked if there was any way to make things right without destroying her whole life. The lawyer just shrugged and said the truth has a price, and she'd already made someone else pay it. That hit her hard, and she went quiet for a long time. Finally, she said she wanted to move forward anyway. The lawyer made her sign a bunch of papers, saying he'd advised her against this and wasn't responsible for what happened next. On the drive back, she asked if I knew any reporters who might listen to her story. I remembered seeing articles about Elias's case in the local paper and looked up who wrote them. The byline said Reese Sinclair, and after some digging online, I found she still worked at the same paper. I called the newsroom from my apartment while Liliana sat on my couch biting her nails. Reese answered on the 3rd ring, and when I explained who I was calling about, she went silent for so long I thought she'd hung up. She said she remembered the case and asked what this was about. I told her Liliana wanted to confess to lying about the whole thing. Reese's voice got sharp, and she asked if this was some sick joke. I put Liliana on the phone, and she started crying as she tried to explain. Reese agreed to meet us, but warned she'd need to verify everything, because she wasn't going to be part of another lie. We met at a coffee shop the next day, and Reese brought a recorder and a notebook full of questions. She grilled Liliana for 2 hours about every detail of that night at the party and how the lie started. Liliana answered everything even when Reese pushed her on the ugly parts. Reese wanted names of everyone who was there when Liliana bragged about destroying Elias. She wanted dates and times and proof that Liliana was lying back then, not lying now. After checking her notes, Reese said she'd need a few days to verify the story with other sources. 3 days later, she called and said she'd confirmed enough to move forward with an interview. I drove Liliana to the newspaper office that Thursday morning. She threw up twice on the way there and had to stop at a gas station to clean herself up. Her hands were shaking so bad she couldn't even button her jacket. At the newspaper, Reese had set up in a small conference room with a camera to record everything. She told Liliana this would be on the record and could be used as evidence if charges were filed. Liliana nodded and sat down even though she looked ready to pass out. For the next hour, she told Reese everything about how she made up the story after Elias was rejected her. She named her friends who helped spread the rumor, including the ones from that video who laughed when she bragged about it. She explained how the lie got bigger when adults got involved, and she was too scared to take it back. She talked about watching Elias lose everything and doing nothing to stop it. Reese asked her why she was coming forward now after all this time. Liliana said she couldn't live with it anymore, and his family deserved the truth, even if it destroyed her. That night around 10, someone threw a brick through the window of her motel room with a note that said she'd get what she deserved. The glass went everywhere and cut her foot when she jumped out of bed. She called me crying, and I drove over to find her sitting on the curb with a towel wrapped around her bleeding foot. The motel manager was yelling about the damage while she tried to explain it wasn't her fault. I helped her pack her stuff and took her to urgent care for stitches, then found another motel across town. We filed a police report, and the cop who showed up turned out to be Detective Franklin Kerr, who'd worked on cases involving some of the kids from that high school. When he heard the names involved, his whole expression changed. He mentioned that Elias's case file was still technically open since he died before the legal stuff finished. He said if Liliana wanted to make an official statement about the false accusation, it might help clear Elias's record, even though he was gone. 2 days later, I went with Liliana to the police station, where she gave a formal statement to Detective Kerr. He recorded everything and had her sign a sworn affidavit admitting she'd lied about the assault. He said this would be added to Elias's file and could be used to officially clear his name. He also warned her that admitting to this opened her up to both criminal charges and civil lawsuits. She said she understood and signed anyway. The next week, Liliana got a certified letter from a law firm representing the Graham family. They were filing a civil suit for damages, including the cost of Elias's legal defense and the therapy his family needed after his death. The number they wanted was more money than Liliana would make in 10 years. She called her lawyer, who said he wasn't surprised and they should meet to discuss options. I drove her to his office where he explained she could fight it, but she'd probably lose given her confession. Her other option was to accept responsibility and work out a payment plan that would follow her for decades. She didn't even hesitate before saying she'd take responsibility for everything. 3 days later, Reese's article went live on the newspaper's website, and within an hour, it was everywhere. The headline made my stomach drop when I saw it on my phone while eating breakfast. Woman admits to false accusation that led to teen suicide, sat there in bold letters above a photo of Liliana from the reunion night. My phone started buzzing with notifications as people shared and commented on the article. Some comments praised her for finally coming clean, while others said she should rot in prison for what she did. The death threats started coming in by noon, with people posting her motel address and saying someone should teach her what real justice looked like. I drove over to check on her and found her curled up on the motel bed with her phone turned off and the curtains drawn tight. She showed me screenshots she'd taken before shutting everything down, and some of the messages made me sick to read. People were describing in detail what they wanted to do to her and posting photos of nooses and guns. We went to the police station to file another report, and Detective Kerr said he'd look into the worst ones, but warned us that online threats rarely led to arrests. The next morning, Liliana had to appear in court, where the judge ordered her to attend therapy with someone named Temperance Fox as part of her plea agreement. The prosecutor explained that Fox specialized in accountability and restorative justice, and Liliana would need to complete at least 6 months of sessions. Liliana nodded and signed the papers without arguing, even though I could see her hands shaking. That afternoon, my phone rang, and when I saw Cody's name, I almost didn't answer. He said his mother wanted to meet with Liliana face-to-face to tell her exactly what Elias's death had done to their family. I told him I wasn't sure that was a good idea, but he insisted it would help his mom find some kind of closure. After talking to Liliana about it, she agreed to the meeting as long as both sides had support people present. We set it up for the following week at a neutral location that the mediator suggested. The morning of the meeting, Liliana threw up twice before we even left the motel, and I had to help her into the car because her legs were shaking so bad. When we walked into the conference room, Margie Graham was already there with Cody and their lawyer. Margie looked older than I expected, with gray hair and deep lines around her eyes that looked like they came from crying. She stared at Liliana for a long moment before she started talking about finding Elias hanging in his bedroom. She described calling 911 and trying to cut him down while screaming for help that came too late. She talked about planning his funeral instead of his graduation party and having to pick out a coffin for her 18-year-old son. She explained how his younger sister still had nightmares and wouldn't go into his old room even though it had been turned into storage. She told Liliana about the therapy bills and the medication she needed to sleep and how her husband left because he couldn't handle the grief. Liliana sat there taking it all in with tears running down her face, but she never interrupted or tried to defend herself. When Margie finished talking, she looked straight at Liliana and said she'd never forgive her, but she was glad the truth was finally out there. After the meeting ended, I drove Liliana back to her motel without either of us saying a word. The radio stayed off, and the only sound was her trying not to sob too loud. When we got there, she thanked me for keeping my promise about not leaving her alone with them, even though she knew she didn't deserve any protection. She got out of the car and walked to her room without looking back. 2 weeks later, the civil mediation started with lawyers from both sides working out how much Liliana would pay the Graham family. The number they settled on would take her at least 15 years to pay off, but she signed the agreement without complaining. Her lawyer tried to negotiate for a lower amount, but she told him to stop, because no amount of money could make up for what she'd done. Meanwhile, some of Liliana's old friends from the video started facing their own consequences when their employers saw the footage. 2 of them lost their jobs when the video went viral, and their companies didn't want to be associated with people who laughed about destroying someone's life. Another one had to close her social media accounts after getting hundreds of angry messages every day. Around this time, I realized I needed to talk to someone about everything that had happened. I kept thinking about that moment in the parking lot when I almost kissed her despite knowing what she'd done. I found a therapist who specialized in trauma and started going once a week to figure out why I felt drawn to help someone who had done something so horrible. The therapist helped me understand that I had a pattern of trying to save people who were beyond saving. A month after everything started, Liliana called to tell me she'd found a job at a warehouse on the night shift. She was using a fake name because nowhere would hire her once they Googled her real one. She worked from 11 at night to 7 in the morning loading trucks and avoiding her coworkers who might recognize her. She said she was sending most of her paycheck to the Grahams and living on rice and beans to make the payments. 3 months crawled by with Liliana, sending me occasional texts about her payments to the Grahams and her night shifts at the warehouse. Then Cody called me one afternoon with news that made me sit down hard on my couch. The district attorney had finished reviewing Elias's case and signed the paperwork to officially clear his record. The false charges were getting removed from every database and background check system. Cody's voice cracked when he told me his brother's name was finally clean, even though nothing could bring him back. The next week, I got another call from Cody, saying they were using part of Liliana's first payment to start a scholarship fund in Elias's name. The family had already picked the first recipient, some kid who got falsely accused of cheating on his SATs and spent 2 years fighting to clear his name. The scholarship would cover his first year of college, and they planned to give out one every year using the money Liliana sent them. I thought about telling her, but decided she'd find out on her own eventually. 2 weeks after that, Liliana texted asking if I could help her with something important. She wanted to visit Elias's grave to apologize, but knew she couldn't just show up at the cemetery without permission. I called Cody, who talked to his mom, and they agreed to let her come, but only if they could be there too. Liliana accepted their terms without any argument or complaint. The cemetery visit happened on a gray Tuesday morning with clouds hanging low and threatening rain. I drove Liliana there in silence, while she clutched a small envelope in her lap. The Grahams were already waiting by Elias's headstone when we arrived. Margie stood with her arms crossed while Cody had his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Liliana walked slowly toward the grave and stopped a few feet away, like she wasn't sure she had the right to get closer. Then she dropped to her knees in the wet grass and started talking to the headstone. She told Elias she was sorry for lying about him and for being too much of a coward to tell the truth when it mattered. She said she knew she didn't deserve forgiveness and wasn't asking for it. She just wanted him to know that she'd spend the rest of her life trying to make things right, even though she knew she never really could. She placed the envelope against the headstone, and it turned out to be a letter she'd written explaining everything she'd done and taking full responsibility. When she stood up, her knees were soaked and muddy. Cody stepped forward and looked her straight in the eyes. He told her he'd never forgive her for what she did to his brother, but he was glad she finally told the truth. It wasn't forgiveness or absolution, but it was an acknowledgement that she'd done one right thing after years of doing the wrong thing. Margie didn't say anything at all, just turned and walked back to her car. On the drive back, Liliana stared out the window, and neither of us talked. That night, I sat in my apartment thinking about everything that had happened since the reunion. 3 months had passed, and I'd kept my promise to help keep her safe through the worst of it. She'd confessed publicly, started paying the family, and faced them at the cemetery. Now, it was time for me to step back and let her continue this journey on her own. I knew I had to tell her I couldn't be part of her life anymore. The next day, I met her at a coffee shop near her warehouse job. She already knew what I was going to say before I opened my mouth. I explained that I'd done what I promised, but I couldn't keep being involved with someone who'd done what she did. She nodded and thanked me for showing her more grace than she ever showed Elias. She didn't try to change my mind, or ask for more time, or make excuses. She just gathered her things and left without looking back. 3 weeks later, I saw her one last time completely by accident. I was walking past a community center when I spotted her through the window, sitting in a circle with about 8 other people. It was some kind of support group for people working through accountability for serious harm they'd caused. She was listening to someone else talk and taking notes in a small notebook. She looked tired but focused, like she was committed to the long process ahead of her. I kept walking without her seeing me. After that, I stayed in touch with Cody, who sent me updates every few weeks. He told me his family was slowly starting to heal, even though they'd never be whole again. Clearing Elias's name had helped them find some peace, and the scholarship fund gave them a way to create something good from their loss. His mom had started going to grief counseling, and his sister was finally able to go into what used to be Elias's room. They'd never get over losing him, but at least now the world knew he was innocent. 6 months after that night at the reunion, I was sitting across from someone new at a restaurant downtown. I'd met her through my therapy sessions when we were both in the waiting room. Her name was Sarah, and she worked as a graphic designer. On our 3rd date, I told her the whole story about Liliana and the reunion and everything that came after. She listened without judgment and helped me understand that my need to save broken people came from my own issues with wanting to feel needed. She didn't run away when I admitted I'd been attracted to someone who'd done something so terrible. Instead, she helped me work through why I'd felt that pull and how to recognize those patterns in the future. We took things slow and built something healthy based on honesty instead of drama or crisis. A few months later, Reese called me out of the blue while I was making dinner. She told me Liliana was still sending money to the Grahams every month without fail. She'd also started volunteering at a place that helps people who got falsely accused of crimes. She never put her name on anything or asked for credit. She just showed up and did the work. Reese said she'd tried to interview her about it, but Liliana refused to talk to any reporters. The Graham family took that scholarship money and helped 3 kids go to college that same year. Each student had to write an essay about Elias and what happened to him. They learned about how lies can destroy lives and why truth matters. Margie sent me a photo of the first scholarship ceremony with all 3 kids holding their certificates. During my next therapy session, my therapist helped me figure out why I'd felt that pull toward Liliana, even after learning what she did. She explained I had this thing where I thought I could fix broken people. It came from growing up with an alcoholic dad, who I always tried to help get better. Understanding that pattern helped me start dating normal people who didn't need saving. On the anniversary of Elias's death, Cody texted me a long message. He thanked me for helping get the truth out there and clearing his brother's name. He told me he'd started seeing someone who understood his grief without trying to fix it. She just let him be sad when he needed to be sad. After 8 months of weekly sessions, I finally finished therapy. My therapist said I'd worked through all the stuff from that night and didn't need to come anymore. I didn't feel guilty anymore about being attracted to someone who'd done something so awful. It wasn't my fault my brain got confused when someone beautiful needed help. The last thing I heard about Liliana came from Reese almost a year later. She'd legally changed her whole name and moved to a different state to start fresh. She was still sending checks to the Grahams and would be for at least another 10 years based on what she owed them. Reese found out she was working at a warehouse under her new name and living in a small apartment. She wasn't dating anyone and mostly kept to herself. When I think back on everything, I realize I did keep my promise to her. I didn't leave her alone with them when she was scared at that reunion. I helped her stay safe while she faced what she'd done. But I also learned that after a certain point, people have to deal with their consequences by themselves. That's not being cruel. That's just how justice works. Sometimes the right thing is stepping back and letting someone carry their own weight. These days, my life looks completely different. I'm engaged to Sarah, who I met in that therapy waiting room. She knows the whole story and helps me spot when I'm falling into old patterns of wanting to save people. Cody's in law school now, working on cases about false accusations because of what happened to his brother. The Elias Graham Memorial Scholarship has helped 20 kids go to college so far. Each one learns about what happened to him and how one lie destroyed a young man's future. They sign a pledge to always tell the truth, even when it's hard. Margie sends me updates every year with photos of the new scholarship kids. She says it helps her feel like Elias's death meant something, like maybe other kids won't suffer the same way because they'll know his story. I don't know where Liliana is now or what name she goes by. I don't need to know. She's living with what she did and paying for it every day. That's between her and the Grahams now. I kept my promise, and then I let go. That's all anyone could have done. Well, that's the thrilling conclusion you didn't ask for. Honestly, I didn't think you'd make it this far, but here we are. If you've got the patience to sit through this, you might as well subscribe. At this point, commitment is commitment.